Every man certainly was afraid. But overcoming the fear depended on the individual. I haven't heard of a single soldier who wasn't afraid over there. And overcoming that fear was extremely important. Well, personally, I have to say that the fear, it also sharpened me. All my senses worked on overload. So the fear was not just a negative thing. The only speculation over there was that we don't want to be left under Russian rule. We had to stay in this very position and beat the enemy right here. And when it comes to faith, well, my mother said to me, "Don't worry, nothing bad's going to happen to you." I think that prayer was on many lips. Help us.
In spring 1944, when the continuation war between Finland and the Soviet Union had been fought for nearly 3 years, Stalin gave the order to finally crush Finland. The Soviet Supreme Command reserved roughly 500,000 well-equipped and trained soldiers for this purpose. The force had a nearly endless supply of planes, tanks, artillery, and other materiel to support it. This awesome army was planned to reach Helsinki only a month after the start of the offensive. That would have meant the occupation of Finland and the loss of Finnish sovereignty. The Finnish army, for its part, had clearly improved its material situation since the Winter War and the offensive phase of the continuation war. Fighter and bomber planes had been acquired from Germany. They were modern, but few in numbers. The new armored division led by Major General Lagos was known as the strongest and most efficient reserve formation that Marshal Mannerheim had. It was equipped with captured Russian tanks and the new assault guns acquired from Germany. But the majority of the tanks were lightweight. The heavy German 75mm anti-tank guns were the only Finnish anti-tank weapons capable of penetrating the armor of the newest Soviet tanks. Some light infantry anti-tank weapons, German recoilless rifles called Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck, had been received on the verge of the massive Soviet offensive. But the training and distribution of these weapons to troops was only just beginning. The Finnish number of field artillery weapons was 3 times what Finland had during the Winter War. The captured Russian guns, together with Finnish and German guns, provided for improved quality in artillery. The percentage of heavy caliber artillery had also increased. Thanks to the artillery general Vilho-Peter Nenonen, the Finnish artillery firing technique was quite advanced. All available fire could be rapidly concentrated onto one target within the ranges of different guns. At the beginning of 1944, the Finnish troops were deployed into their main defense positions across the 60-kilometer wide Karelian Isthmus. The line of defense followed roughly the state border. Because of constant enemy activity, the main defense position never became very strong. The tank obstacles of rock were missing, and no robust minefields could be constructed under enemy observation. Most of all, the defense position lacked depth. In most areas, there was only one single trench. The trench warfare consisted mostly of monotonous sentry duties. Instead of efficient training, some units prepared hobby crafts and improved their surroundings to look nicer. A little over 20 kilometers behind the main line of defense, there was the topographically more suitable Vammelsu-Taipale line of defense, called the VT line. However, due to shortage of workers and material, it was unfinished. The third line of defense on the Karelian Isthmus was the Viipuri-Kuparsaari-Taipale line. The so-called VKT line was supposed to be the final line, where the Soviet offensive would absolutely have to be stopped. This line was even more unfinished than the aforementioned VT line. In reality, it only existed on planners' maps. The battlefield equation on men, tanks, artillery, and fighter planes was crushingly favorable to the Russians.
We all knew that they were preparing for something. You could hear their noises at night. Heavy loads of material were brought in and they were digging trenches towards our lines. We couldn't see them from our fire observation point, but we heard from the boys in the next unit. I'd say we had clear indications of an oncoming attack.
Based on the signal intelligence led by Lieutenant Colonel Reino Hallamaa, prisoner information, and the activity and noise caused by the Soviet troops, the Finns knew that a massive offensive was being prepared, but they had no information on the timing and they were unable to foresee the intensity of the offensive. The onslaught of steel was in the making, and Finland's existence was at stake. On June the 9th at 6 a.m., the tempest erupted. Hundreds of bomber and attack planes attacked the Finnish positions. The Finnish air defense guns were much too scarce. After the air attack phase, the Soviet artillery and mortars started their intense fire. More than 2,000 guns were concentrated on the 8-kilometer sector of Valkeasaari alone. The second day, an even more intense inferno of fire commenced. Men and weapons were buried in sand. Soldiers hit directly completely disappeared into the air. The smoke and dust turned day into night. After this, there was no possibility to repel the attack by infantry and tanks. The survivors withdrew, some in panic. The Finnish artillery attempted to support its own troops in very unfavorable circumstances. It had already used almost half of the available ammunition on the previous day.
The sovereignty of our fatherland and the existence of our people hung by a thread on numerous occasions in the summer of 1944, especially on the Western Karelia Isthmus, but also north of Laatoko, on the Aunas Isthmus and Maaselkä Isthmus. The Russians concentrated a devastating force in the direction of the Karelia Isthmus because that was the key area to the shortest and best attack routes into the heart of Finland, all the way to Helsinki. After all, Stalin had decided to occupy all of Finland. For him, it was essential to reach Helsinki by mid-July at the latest.
The horse-drawn artillery teams were destroyed in the enemy fire. Some of the gunners fought with rifles, trying to slow down the enemy. But the enemy was advancing rapidly. On July 10th, 68 artillery guns were lost. Supply and logistics were very difficult. Artillery fire was being observed based on sounds alone, because radio connections were poor and the telephone lines were cut. The enemy pressure remained heavy. Already, after little more than 24 hours from the breakthrough, the enemy was in battle contact with the defenders of the VT line. So the VT line became the main line of defense. Now it was crucial to keep that line in order to be able to move Finnish troops from eastern Karelia into the Isthmus area. The Russians broke into the VT line in several places. In Siiranmäki, Lieutenant Colonel Ehrnroot's troops threw back the enemy with swift and fierce counterattacks. During the pull-out phase, the use of Finnish artillery was at its most intense in Siiranmäki. The Siiranmäki battle gave the Finns new courage to stop the overwhelming enemy.
The role of artillery in Siiranmäki was significant. Our troops in Siiranmäki were supported by up to 10 artillery battalions, that is 120 guns, plus mortar units.